thoughts in a new school way. When I grew up, you had certain myths, myths, superstitions, um, and narratives that you live by. And they really did control your decision. One of them was Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th, man. Friday the 13th, when that fell, it's an unlucky day. And you're not going to have any good luck that day. So don't plan on having any good luck if it's Friday the 13th. And so as a young man, I listened to that because it was the older, wiser adults telling me this. And so, Friday the 13th, I didn't want to leave the house. I didn't want to go to school. I didn't want to do anything. And it did affect my decisions for a long time until I decided to go against the myth. I decided I'm not going to sit home on every Friday the 13th because one of those days fell on a payday. And I had to make a decision. There was no direct deposit back then. You had to make a decision. Am I going to go get my check, which is good, or am I going to be controlled by the narrative of the wise old folks folklore about Friday the 13th? So I made a decision to go get my check because I needed the money. And so nothing happened. And I'm thinking, well, wow, what's that about? Right. And so I just continued every Friday the 13th. I just went on, and now I don't even think about it Friday the 13th. Right. So that was one. Don't leave your purse on the floor. You'll stay broke. Right. What other wives tales? Don't walk under a ladder. Oh, the biggest one. If a black cat crosses your path, turn around and go the other way, because you're not going to have anything but bad luck going that way. Myths, wives' tales, superstitions become narratives. Have you ever heard somebody say, nobody's ever done that? You can't do that. Or they won't let you do that. The infamous they. We hear a lot about they. They won't let me do this. They won't give me my break. That becomes a narrative. That becomes a myth. Yesterday, I had the honor of being a presenter in real estate awards for one of our partners that I'm in business with, Keller Williams. And we were fortunate to have Gary Keller, chairman of Keller Williams International, over almost 200,000 associates and thousands of offices around the world. And we had the man, the myth, not really a myth because he's real, the legend in the house. And he was sharing about this thing of mythology that I'm talking with you about, myth. And so one of the examples was the 4-minute mile. Maybe you're old enough to remember about the 4-minute mile. Probably not a big deal today because everybody does it. Most athletes train on it. But back in the day, the 4-minute mile had never been broken. Nobody had ever done a 4-minute mile. Very big deal. And so one guy, we all know the guy that broke the record, right? You can go Google it. It was Roger Bannister, the guy that broke the 4-minute mile. But there was another guy that was involved. And Gary was sharing about this story that there was a guy named John Landy. And he was the first guy that was attempting to do it. But he got stopped not by his abilities, but he got stopped by the myth that it had never been done before. It was his Friday the 13th. It was his don't walk on the ladder. It was his black cat in your way, go back the other way. So he told himself, based on the myth, based on the information, he couldn't do it. Here comes Roger Bannister. He doesn't know the myth. No one ever told him not to walk under a ladder. No one ever told him not to turn around the other way if a black cat crosses your path. No one ever told him that if your wife leaves her purse on the floor, you guys will be broke. Nobody ever told him that. He goes and he strategies out how to do the 4-minute mile, and he does them in increments. So he started in doing, right, a quarter of a mile under a minute, okay, half a mile in under a minute, right, this in under a minute. So he did them in increments. So by the time he was ready to do the full 4-minute mile, he had it already down. He broke it, right? He broke it. Now, what was the difference between him and John Landy? I think John Landy probably was more talented. It was his wheelhouse. He had studied it, and it was his idea. And yet, he was not able to do it because he was controlled by a myth and a narrative. What controls you? What really controls you? Because the reason why I'm asking that question is because all of us are inundated with messages every single day. You have approximately 1,500 words per minute running through your head right now as we are having this conversation. You have about 10,000 thoughts a day. Where do they come from? Who gave you the thought? Which one sticks? Which one stays? Which one goes? How do you determine that? How do you determine when you're watching the news what's true, what's not true? How do you do the investigation? How do you verify? Do you just assume that because the person is sitting on a desk and behind a camera that everything they're saying is true? And you're eating it and you're going out in society with the narrative controlled by the myth, right? We have a myth that all white people are racist. Everybody you don't like suddenly becomes a racist. Well, that's a myth. It's not true. Even when you look at the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, there were just as many white Americans, brothers and sisters, helping, supporting Hispanic, supporting Dr. Martin Luther King. You may see primarily the images of African Americans, but there were people of different faiths, denominations, races, creeds, and color supporting it. It may have been termed a black movement, but there were all colors of people in that. But you don't get that when you look at the history books or you look at certain people's conversation about it. It's the myth, it's the narrative that they want you to think that was exclusively one group and the other group didn't want to support it and they were all part of this other hate group or deal, right? You gotta stop and think. Is this a myth? Is this a narrative or is this my reality? Roger Bannister came along and said, this is not a folktale to me. It's not a narrative to me. This is my reality. I'm going to break the 4-minute mile. So what happened? Let's go back to the scene. John Landy, the guy who ran it first, guess what he did? He comes behind it. He breaks it. Why could he break it then and he couldn't break it the first time? Because somebody had already done it. Roger Bannister had already done it. Now, hundreds of people have broken that record. But Roger Bannister was the first one to say, not going to be controlled by the myth. We all have it in our life, okay? You have them, I have them. They come from different people, places, things. I think the thing is, when it comes to money, what's your myth about money? When it comes to marriage and relationships, what are the myths about it that you are controlled by? When it comes to relationships, business, creativity, maybe somebody told you that you were not creative because the first thing you drew, they laughed at. I remember that. I remember in school, right? I used to love to draw, and I would draw what I knew how to draw because I went to church all the time. So I drew churches and little birds. And then somebody came along and saw it, and they laughed at it. I never drew again. And I was never creative. So my intent from that point is, well, I'm just going to be smart. I'm going to be analytical. And it wasn't until years later that one of my mentors challenged me, forced me in the area of being creativity. So I had to break that myth that I wasn't creative. I had to break that myth, had to break that black cat folklore tale in order to step in creativity. This show today is a result of some of the creativity that I have been doing over the last 10 or 15 years. But had I not been forced, I would still be trying to give you data points, analytics, and things like that. But as of now, I can think out of both sides of my brain. I can think out of the analytical side. I can think out of the creative side. You are probably the same thing. What if somebody told you that you can't do? And it probably was younger. we'll resist it as adult, but when you're 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and somebody tells you that you can't do something or some life event happens, that becomes your myth. That becomes your legend. That becomes your folktale. And you know what? And you'll tell people about that. Hey, I'm not good at basketball. I'm not good at running. I'm not good at this. I'm not good at that. Why are you telling yourself? Because you bought the narrative and you bought the myth. So, homework assignment is maybe just take a quiet time to say, take the areas that are important to you, your marriage or your raising children or money or your business or your job or your goals. Why do you have the goals that you do? Or you have the goals because you came up with them, or you have the goals because you're trying to please somebody else, or somebody else told you needed to be doing that. You need to examine it. And how much of that is myth? How much of that is a narrative that is used to control your decisions? How much of that is your reality? All right, this is Lewis Howard, dropping it like it's hot. The daily inspirational messages, recipe for the soul. Stay tuned. We got more food recipes. We put up that air fried chicken. That was a hot one. And lamb. Maybe do something fun this weekend. I think maybe ribs or something. So we're continue to add food as a metaphor to inspiration, as well as inspirational principles, philosophical thoughts, and insights for you. Hey, we appreciate you. Thank you for supporting us. We've reached over 1,000 subscribers. We have over 10,000 views of the different clips, and I appreciate you. And for those of you that have purchased the book, Living Up in a Down World, we appreciate your support. You can always go to Lewis Howard Live and follow. And of course, we've got the podcast every week that we do as well. Thank you for being part of the conversation. We'll see you again on another daily inspiration recipe for the soul to help you become the best version